Very good. So we'll invite our next panel to come up. And so Helen, Hambly, Odame, and Laxmi Pant from University of Guelph have been looking at some case studies related to EORN and the rollout of broadband in Eastern Ontario. And so they're going to be speaking about that. And joining them is Cam Mather, who is, as you'll hear, in many ways a modern rural Renaissance man. And so he's going to be talking from his own experience and the impacts of broadband on his life as an entrepreneur. So let's welcome Helen, Laxmi, and Cam.
So first of all, I'm going to start with an apology because I'm going to have to read a little bit to open up this topic, this paper, which is quite complicated, so that we can use our time efficiently today. So if there's any students out in the audience of mine particularly, don't do this when I'm watching your presentations, okay, because you'll get marked down. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to break my rule. Okay. So the context of rural broadband is a complex, multifaceted one that needs to take into account economic, political, cultural, environmental, and infrastructure factors. This messy context benefits from a systems perspective, we argue. Systems thinking helps to see the technical as well as the institutional links between global, national, regional, and rural innovation. As a technological innovation, broadband helps users achieve many development goals more efficiently than conventional transactional approaches to communication and information access. However, broadband is also an institutional innovation in that it organizes behavior, social relations, and resources in new and exciting ways. There is surprisingly limited systems thinking in the discussions of rural broadband. And yet studies, such as the one in which we've been involved, indicates that both technological and institutional innovation are occurring throughout broadband deployment in Southern Ontario. I'd like to stop here and say that today you're going to hear from 3 of our team members. Our work is not, however, occurring in a vacuum. Let's see, where do we? Is the projector around? It's actually involving a network of many other agencies, the majority of which are non-academics, but all of us aim to be analytical, practical, and strategic about our engagement in rural broadband issues. In our brief presentation, we're going to try and highlight some key broadband-enabled innovations. Cam Mather is going to highlight his experiences as a producer with internet technologies on his farm. His reflections are supplemented by Dr. Laxmi Pant, my colleague from the University of Guelph, who will suggest that an economic return on broadband deployment is an important but only one aspect of the innovation system. Other key dimensions include environmental, artistic, and health benefits. In this slide, you'll see that our work is actually sorry, I'm going to go back, is actually not specific only to Eastern Ontario. We're going to argue today and also in the studies that we've been doing, partnering with Queen's University, that understanding what's happening here in Eastern Ontario needs to be contextualized within a wider system, a provincial system, where we face similar challenges, but also different challenges across Southern Ontario. So in this slide, you'll see the 2 networks, one that is already under implementation, you've just heard about that, EORN, and the other one known as SWIFT, the Southwest Integrated Fibre Technology Network in southwestern Ontario. And these 2 networks are certainly the emphasis of our research given the time that we have for this study. But again, we'd argue that a systems of perspective has to take into a wider perspective. Unfortunately, academics will use diagrams like this to show you how we represent analytically how broadband deployment in Ontario can be understood as influencing changes within the innovation systems in which we exist. Our results from our studies, we have 2 studies within this partnership, SHIRK partnership with Queen's University, point to the following things. First of all, within the system, there's some key drivers occurring. Our case studies identify key drivers associated with economic return for farmers. These are everything from more efficiency gains within barn systems And you saw that with the Danish example that Norm presented. Precision agriculture and micro-dosing of fertilizers and inputs into the farming system, which have a strong economic benefit in terms of saving costs for farmers, but also an environmental benefit. And then also new and exciting ways that farmers can engage in a global market, international markets. And so again, this is where the systems perspective is very interesting, because we can understand it as the fact that what's happening locally within Eastern Ontario is having spillover and influencing effects across a global system. And a good example that we have from Southwestern Ontario is an operation where a breed of sheep, which was on the sort of perhaps on the side of not being as well developed as other breeds of sheep, but had superior qualities. The farmers not only were able to recapture a disappearing breed of livestock, but also engage in an international embryo transfer initiative, taking them to the 21st century of farming activities. We're also seeing a key driver around green energy. I don't really specifically have any data or results around wind energy, but certainly on the solar energy side, we have cases where farmers have skipped from the 20th century into a very advanced stage of the 21st century because of the connectivity required to run solar farms and solar systems. Farmers went from not even having dial-up internet access to having advanced speeds, and investing in that as part of the work that they're doing on solar farms and green energy. We see key drivers around real estate and the value of rural land. And it's very interesting to see that this is going to have spillovers into a new form of rural residency. Residency that's based on teleworking, a seasonal relocation, so on a permanent but seasonal basis into rural areas. And then something that's also very interesting, the retirements. The removal of mandatory retirement for many institutions in the province are also resulting in a land class of individuals who want to retire permanently in rural areas, but also maintain their work and activity as producers and consumers of online businesses. The second area I think that is interesting that we are seeing in the cases points to multifunctionality. This is becoming a reality with rural broadband development, and it's a blending of multiple land use options, and Cam and Laxmi will speak more about this. Along with the innovation benefits, there's still gaps, and there could potentially cause new drivers of innovation to either halt or to slow down or maybe not even emerge at all. So on one hand, while there have been benefits such as telehealth services for mental health, for even specific users, such as French speakers in Southwestern Ontario, through digital connectivity. At the same time, we know that there's gaps and obstacles opposed by inadequate technological and institutional innovation that are preventing us from achieving faster upload and download speeds, affordability, and overall quality of service. So this is a call really to continue this research effort and to make sure that we bring a thorough systems perspective to it, to make sure that we capture all levels of outcomes and impacts available through broadband deployment. So I'd like to stop here and have Cam Mather, our research participant, join us today.
Thanks, Helen. My name is Cam Mather, and I started my electronic publishing business in 1987 in Burlington. We were burned out on the city, so in 1998 we bought 150 acres of Tamworth off the electricity grid, which turned out to be a really stupid thing to do, but we figured out the nuts and bolts of solar and wind power. Our biggest challenge, actually, in terms of running the business has always been communication. We had a radio phone, which was quite problematic, which restricted how much bandwidth we had. So we were one of the first people to put in an Xplornet satellite dish. Right now, when you put in rural broadband, most people in our situation would get free equipment, and $60 or $70 a month. Our equipment cost us $3,000. We were paying about $300 a month. Anytime I call for tech support now, I give them my tech number, and they say, Mr. Mather, you're missing a couple of digits. I said, no, I was like number 30 on your thing. we, as our business sort of evolved, we spent a lot of time going back to the city to deal with customers. I was burned out on going through the GTA. We published a book on renewable energy in about 2004. Turned out, did very well in North America. 2007, we gave up all our customers doing desktop publishing, stuck to the book business. 2008, the book business collapsed with the economic collapse in the United States. So we have sort of been forced to, we use the business model now, we call anything for a buck. And my wife does some internet work, helping with web pages. We have tried a lot of things. That was a great quote from Thomas Edison. I've never failed. I've just tried a lot of things that haven't worked. The challenge has been, we know I can go back to the city and get work, but I don't want to do that. So the challenge is how do you take 150 acres and make money from it? Most of it's wooded. We have a workshop coming up in a couple of weeks where people come up and learn about homesteading and how to actually integrate sustainable and independent living into their life. I have a couple coming up in a couple of days for half a day to spend with us. They're building an off-grid house. They want to learn how to do it. They found us all through the internet. They found it through our blog, and that's been a real source of interest and helped us generate some revenue that way. We also, right now, we run a CSA, so we have, for 16 weeks, we provide 50 families with a box of organic produce from our garden. The website has helped us sort of reach out and keep in communication with those our customers. We're lucky to live in a very innovative town, which is Tamworth, and we have somebody here today, Hans Honegger, and his partner, Carolyn Butts, have been very innovative in trying to get something happening in Tamworth. We haven't been able to draw a large business, but it's created this community of creative, artistic people who want to do cool things, and you have a whole series of people in our community. Don Stinson, who sells wooden bowls throughout North America, a couple that does counseling over the internet. We have all sorts of people doing cool things, and I really do think that having access to the internet has helped that. We'd love to have a huge employer come to town. We got close to having a medical marijuana place come, but we didn't have the electricity infrastructure to do that. But one thing I've discovered is that to stay put, to leave my house and live in the country, even with the skills I have, it's really hard to make money doing it. But to have the infrastructure there has been really helpful, and the internet has been integral to that. So
great. There's some slides. There's some pictures. I'll take you through them. Okay. This is somebody who never uses PowerPoint. Wouldn't that be nice? That's what I think. Okay, so do you want to tell us who's on the slides or what's on the slides?
Well, I should also say, no, I'm quite familiar with PowerPoint.
Oh,
good. One of the things I was doing in 2008 was I did workshops at community colleges across the province, at Algonquin and St. Lawrence and Mohawk. Again, in 2008, that business just dried up, so had to find something else. But yes, that's our little house off the grid, and we do run a bed and breakfast now. That's that's our gardens. We have 2 pickup points for our produce. One is in Hans' garage in Tamworth. The other is in Napanee. So we have 2 places that we take our stuff. And one of the reasons people follow our blog is because we're a zero carbon house. We don't produce any carbon, and we just spend a lot of time telling people how to do that. And that's been one of the ways that we've been able to generate a meager income from that.
I think it's Cam.
Thanks, Cam. So Cam lived off-grid for the last 15 years, and I grew up off-grid for the first 16 years of my life. So very remote rural area. The only communication we had was radio. So that's how we are together here. And we have another example of multifunctional farm. And this farm is in Brighton, and they have a whole lot of activities that has been made possible by access to high-speed internet. So they are basically farm that cares for nature. So I would say a nature care farm. And then now they are moving into some sort of social engagement as well. So the biggest event they have is the corn maze. And every year they engage with different charities for fundraising, and then they design 6 acres of corn maze, easy to get lost, and part of fundraising goes to charities. For example, one year they work with Habitat for Humanity, and they had to design their corn maze, in the shape of house. And then the lady who organizes the corn maze, she told me that wintertime she does research about those organizations, learn about their goal and mission and vision, and based on that she designed some games for kids, children. And they also have school visits, and they also conserve biodiversity. They have 41 varieties of apple, and 13 of them you can go and pick your own apples, and they also have pick your own tomatoes. So how do you get how do you find them? Where are they? So earlier they had to rely on rural routes, where you can list your business with the minimum fee, and now with the access to high-speed internet, they have their own web page, interactive web page. And then they also have electronic newsletter. Earlier they used to send those newsletter by Canada Post, and now they are not doing that anymore. So and they are also doing financial transaction through internet. So this way our farms are becoming more multifunctional. And when I look at these case studies, and we have whole lot of other case studies that are in farm equipments that our your own colleagues they were talking earlier, and then we have food processor, craft beer, local breweries. They have been using internet, and we also have case study of our food retailers. They found that social engagement, Twitter, Facebook, it has been very useful to engage with their customers. And then when you are into their facility, when the order is getting ready, you have the opportunity to entertain them if you have Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi access. So by the time you prepare the meal, they don't get bored. So those are some of the examples that we have seen. But the gap we have found in our context is that we don't have that many multifunctional farms that are into services, social service. Let's say in Netherlands, in Austria, and the UK, they have very different type of multifunctional farms. They are well integrated into healthcare institutions. They have some sort of subsidy from the government, and then they actually run those multifunctional farms, and they invite patients, youth, old age people to enjoy the landscape. And then the best example that comes from the UK, they have multifunctional farm, the care farm, that's what they call. That's for veterans who come back from service, and then they are using that to rehab them. And in our context, we are saying that baby boomers are retiring, they want to go back to the nature. How we can do that? Maybe this can be one way to look at our farms. Our farms diversify into more service-oriented activities, as we have seen from Olena's presentation as well. That's where we have impact, and this is how we can revitalize our rural communities. And thank you so much for your interest and our donors.
So we have a few minutes for questions with Helen, Laxmi, and Cam. Any questions? Of course, it's starting at the back.
A question for Dr. Hambly. I'm just curious if this new business environment is going to show up in the PPS anytime soon.
Yeah, so, thanks. thanks. I'll do PowerPoint, you do bikes. Yeah, I hope so. And I mean, it's obviously, I mean, you've answered your own question. But I think let's flip it around and just say, what's the kind of information and data that we need to be able to inform really good policy around any further investment from the public sector in broadband deployment, but also to inform the private enterprises themselves, the telecommunication companies, the ISPs, et cetera, who are looking for business opportunities. And so if we ask the question that way, it's going to get us into a dialogue, and we need to go and put some effort and time and resources into that dialogue. And I think what we've been able to do with this SHIRK project is we've been able to start to flag some patterns and trends, both at the macroeconomic, the microeconomic, and the non-economic level, especially as we move into environmental, ecological sectors. And I think this becomes a really attractive discussion for people, including the public who live in urban areas. Because if you start to look at these types of findings, you actually have the case that someone just asked a question about earlier, which is why should urban residents or urban citizens care about what's happening in the rural areas of Canada, rural remote areas. So I think the project and the task is in front of us.
And Helen, maybe could you just, what is PPS? Could you explain that?
You want to go ahead? Go ahead. And why do you think it's important? I'm going to ask you.
Provincial policy statement,
Yeah.
Which affects land use planning. And I'm the Director for Economic Development in the City of Kawartha Lakes. We're a single-tier municipality, and we get slapped continuously by the province when we want to get outside of the, let's call them the rural towns and villages.
Yeah.
And when we have to set our urban boundaries, if you will, it becomes very problematic for seasonal residents who want to move up to their lakefront properties or who want to take on a 100-acre farm and operate a business from that. So it becomes a little bit more challenging. And when we're providing the urban centers with the aggregates and the water and the wood and whatnot, we feel that we're subsidizing the urban centers quite a bit, actually.
Thanks very much. I think we had a question at the front here and then the second word.
I was just going to pick up on the PPS question. I mean, am I missing something, or is this whole discussion not enabling, potentially, the rural contribution to the rural part of the PPS?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with this kind of access to the rural community, there's no reason the rural community can't participate in it. And we don't have to have a few people living next to Queen's Park planning the rest of the province in this case, or any province. I mean, this enables the intelligence of the community to come together where it's relevant.
No.
It's Bob, any comments from the panel?
Absolutely. It's an institutional innovation. That's what I would call it. Things are changing. The rules of the game are changing. And it's really important to recognize how broadband deployment is changing these rules. So all I can say is absolutely, I agree. I grew up in a rural area outside of Guelph on a farm, a mixed farm. My parents lost the farm to the banks. This is during the 80s when beef prices fell through. It's really hard to live that life. And when you come through that type of life experience, and I think this is how I relate to respondents and in our work like Cam and his family, you feel what rurality is. It's not a concept. It's not a map. It's not even in a discussion around PPS or anything else. It's a life. It's livelihoods. And so it's that type of discussion that just needs to come up to the dominant media and to the dominant spaces where institutions make their rules. So,
yeah, and I can address that too. We have a challenge in Stone Mills Township, where I'm from, that most people work outside of our township. So everybody jumps in the car and they drive to Napanee or Kingston. And we also have a situation where we basically have a food desert, where we're surrounded by farms that grow food, but nobody in Stone Mills consumes that food. It's all commodities that are grown and they're shipped to international markets. And I believe that the international agency is correct, that we hit peak oil in 2005, peak conventional oil, that the reason price of oil is still $100 a barrel is because we've found the easy stuff. The hard stuff is buried in the tar sands and it's in the Gulf of Mexico. Oil prices have nowhere to go but up. And the problem is that right now I can't convince local people to buy food locally. They don't understand that every farmer in Ontario is 55 or 60 years old, and young people don't want to get into it. And the reality is that it's cheaper to buy potatoes for $10 a pound at Giant Tiger, or for $1 for 10 pounds, and that by the time that the price of oil is so high we can't afford to get them for that price from Prince Edward Island anymore, nobody in Stonewalls is going to be growing because everybody's going to say there's no market for it. So I think the reality is that what we're trying to do is to stimulate young people to come in and start farming on a smaller basis. And one of my attitudes is that part of that is through young people want access to things like Facebook and be able to promote it and to interact with their customers and stuff. So it's really nice to have that ability in a community like ours.
When we look at these issues from system perspective, technology is only 10% of the solution. So we have a whole lot of other institutional issues there. So unless we address those issues, access to internet may not make any impact in other areas.
We have time for one more question.
I don't intend this as a criticism of anyone who used the phrase. It's come to mean something to me lately, and that's the phrase middle of nowhere. We're all probably from the middle of nowhere at this conference, and I think we should stop using that phrase. I attended the organic conference in Guelph back in January, and Farmer John Peterson from the US, who runs Angel Organics, quite a famous guy in the CSA business, he spoke about this idea of being from the middle of nowhere, and he said everywhere is somewhere. Yeah. And in fact, every farm is a poem. Every farm is a story. And we need to appreciate that story more. And actually, the story is what our consumers want these days. The connection between the consumer for the local food and the farmer who's growing it, or the farmers that are growing it, is part of the attraction of the product. So I don't know, I guess I'm on a personal campaign to eliminate that phrase, and to see that we all see that we live somewhere that's important, and that we're all connected to many other important locations.
Responses from the panel?
I could say that I was fortunate enough that Hans let me have our Tamworth pickup on Tuesdays in his garage. But on Thursdays we couldn't find a place in Napanee, so I had to take the truck down and park in the shade at a park, and then people had to come for 2 hours and pick up the food that I'd grown. And I've published books, I've done websites, I've done corporate reports, but there was nothing greater in my life than to have people come and pick up a basket of food from me every day and tell me, oh, you should have seen what I cooked last week, and it's so good and it tastes so good, and that connection with the customer was fabulous. So I live in the middle of nowhere, I chose to be off the grid, I love my peace and quiet, and I can easily never see another human being, but when you produce a product and you get to give it to them and they rave about it, there's nothing like it.
Very good. Well, let's thank our panelists. When the Ontario government first asked the Monieson Centre to explore how would you measure the impact of EOR, how would you figure that out, and a big part of our report, which is available on our website, was saying you need to look at both qualitative and quantitative methodologies, and that jargon is really exhibited in what you've just seen. So we have Olena doing a macroeconomic analysis, looking at the real numbers of what's happening here, but also the stories are very important. And so both Helen and Laxmi's study as well as Olena's study, they're just in the final phases of writing up the reports, and those will be available on our website, economicrevitalization.ca, later this spring. And then we'll be working on policy briefs for all the projects as well. So let's thank them again, and we'll take a half-hour break.